My name is Sofia Martinez, and I learned that blood doesn't always mean family when my own mother chose her pride over my wedding day. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about loyalty, honor, and what it means to be truly supported. Sometimes the family you choose shows up in ways you never expected. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was stirring cream into my coffee, watching the Seattle rain streak down my apartment window, when my phone buzzed against the granite counter. Mom's name flashed on the screen, and for a split second, I felt that familiar flutter of hope. Maybe this time would be different. Sofia. Her voice was crisp, businesslike, the same tone she used when discussing insurance premiums or grocery lists. No warmth, no greeting, just my name spoken like an obligation. "Hi, Mom. Did you get the invitation?" A pause stretched between us, filled with the weight of everything we'd never said, everything she'd never been able to accept about my life choices. The ivory wedding invitation I'd sent 3 weeks ago had been carefully crafted, embossed with gold lettering that spelled out my engagement to Marcus Thompson, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. I'd agonized over every word, hoping that somehow the formality and elegance might soften whatever walls she'd built around her heart. I received it. Another pause. "Sofia, we need to talk." The way she said my name, with that particular inflection of disappointment she'd perfected over the years, made my stomach drop. I knew what was coming, but some part of me still clung to the possibility that I was wrong. "I won't be attending your wedding." The words hit like a physical blow. I set my coffee mug down carefully, afraid my suddenly unsteady hands might drop it. "What do you mean you won't be attending?" "You know exactly what I mean." Her voice carried that familiar edge of martyrdom, as if she were the one being wronged. "I've made my position clear about this relationship, about your choices. I cannot, in good conscience, stand witness to something I fundamentally disagree with." I closed my eyes, leaning against the kitchen counter for support. We'd had this conversation before, in different variations, ever since I'd brought Marcus home 2 years ago. My mother, Patricia Martinez, had built her entire identity around certain expectations. Her daughter would marry a nice civilian, preferably a doctor or lawyer, someone who worked in an office and came home every night at 6, someone safe, predictable, controllable. Marcus was none of those things. He was a career Marine, dedicated to service, with deployments and training exercises that took him away for months at a time. He was also Black, which my mother would never admit bothered her, but I could see it in the way her lips pressed into a thin line whenever she saw his picture, in the way she never quite met his eyes during our rare family gatherings. "Mom, please, this is my wedding day, your only daughter's wedding day. And you're throwing your life away." The words came out sharp, final. "I raised you to be smarter than this, Sofia. I worked 2 jobs to put you through college so you could have a stable life, not so you could tie yourself to someone who could be killed overseas at any moment, leaving you alone with children to raise by yourself." The irony wasn't lost on me. My father had walked out on us when I was 8, leaving my mother to do exactly that, raising a child alone. But somehow, in her mind, that was different. His abandonment was a choice. Military service was a calling, but she couldn't see the distinction. "Marcus isn't Dad," I said quietly. "He's committed to our family, to our future together. His service doesn't change that." "His service is exactly the problem." Her voice rose slightly, cracking the careful control she usually maintained. "Do you have any idea what it's like, waiting for that phone call, watching the news, wondering if today is the day someone in uniform shows up at your door? I won't watch you go through that, and I won't pretend to celebrate a decision that terrifies me." I understood her fear, even if I couldn't accept her response to it. My mother had always been driven by anxiety, by the need to control every variable in her environment. My relationship with Marcus represented chaos to her, uncertainty she couldn't manage or predict. "So that's it?" I asked. "You're just not coming?" "I've made my decision, Sofia. I hope someday you'll understand that I'm trying to protect you." The line went dead, leaving me standing in my kitchen with the dial tone buzzing in my ear. I stared at the phone for a long moment, as if looking at it hard enough might make her call back, might undo what had just happened. But the silence stretched on, and reality settled over me like a heavy blanket. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, still holding the phone. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. Through the window, I could see people hurrying along the sidewalk below, their lives continuing normally, while mine felt like it had just shifted off its axis. This wasn't entirely unexpected. My relationship with my mother had been strained ever since I'd introduced Marcus. She'd been polite but cold during our few meetings, asking questions that felt more like interrogations, making comments that walked the line between concern and condemnation. When Marcus and I got engaged 6 months ago, she'd received the news with the enthusiasm typically reserved for tax audits. But some part of me had hoped that when it came to my actual wedding day, maternal instinct would win out. That love would override fear, that she'd find a way to set aside her concerns for one day to celebrate with her daughter. The naive part of me had pictured her helping me get ready, maybe even crying happy tears as she watched me walk down the aisle. Instead, I was facing the reality of getting married without my mother there, without any family there actually. My mother was my only close relative. My grandparents had passed away years ago, and the few cousins I had were scattered across the country, more acquaintances than family. I picked up the wedding invitation from where it sat on the counter, running my fingers over the raised lettering. Mr. and Mrs. Patricia Martinez, request the honor of your presence. I'd put her name on the invitation, even though she wasn't paying for anything, even though she'd made it clear she didn't approve. I'd hoped it might make her feel included, might soften her stance. The guest list was small to begin with. Military weddings often were, with friends scattered across bases worldwide and deployments making planning difficult. Most of our guests would be Marcus's Marine buddies and their families, people who understood the unique challenges and rewards of military life. Good people who'd become like family to both of us over the past 2 years. But there's something different about blood family, something that feels essential, especially on a wedding day. The tradition of a father walking his daughter down the aisle, of a mother adjusting her daughter's veil, of family photos spanning generations, these things matter in ways that are hard to articulate but impossible to ignore.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I called Marcus, knowing he was probably in the middle of training exercises, but needing to hear his voice. He answered on the third ring, slightly out of breath. "Hey, beautiful, everything okay?" Just hearing his voice made some of the tension in my chest ease. Marcus had this way of making everything feel manageable, no matter how overwhelming life became. It was one of the things I loved most about him, his steady presence in the middle of chaos. "My mom called," I said, and I could hear him sigh on the other end of the line. "And? She's not coming to the wedding." Silence. Then, "I'm sorry, Sophia. I know how much you were hoping." "I know you are." And I did know. Marcus had tried, in his own quiet way, to bridge the gap between my mother and me. He'd been respectful during their meetings, patient with her pointed questions, understanding about her concerns. He'd never pushed, never demanded that I choose between them, even when her disapproval became increasingly obvious. "Do you want to talk about it?" I almost smiled despite everything. Marcus never pressured me to share more than I was ready to give, but he always made it clear that the option was there. It was such a contrast to my mother's approach, which involved either complete emotional shutdown or intense interrogation with no middle ground. She said she can't in good conscience witness something she disagrees with. The words tasted bitter. She thinks I'm throwing my life away, that I should have married someone safe and predictable, instead of a Marine who might deploy at any time. "She's scared," Marcus said gently. "I get it. Military life isn't easy, especially for families. But that doesn't make her response right." This was another thing I loved about him. He could acknowledge other people's perspectives without sacrificing his own principles or making excuses for behavior that was hurtful. It was a maturity my mother had never developed, this ability to hold complexity without needing everything to be black and white. I stopped, not sure how to finish the sentence. I thought she'd love me enough to set aside her fears for one day. I thought blood would be thicker than disapproval. I thought I mattered more than her need to be right. I know, he said, and I could hear the sympathy in his voice. I thought maybe she'd come around too. We talked for a few more minutes, Marcus reassuring me that the wedding would be beautiful with or without my mother there, that the people who truly mattered would be present to celebrate with us. He was right, of course, but it didn't completely ease the sting of rejection. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring out at the gray Seattle sky. The rain had picked up, drumming against the window in a steady rhythm that matched the ache in my chest. I thought about calling my mother back, maybe trying one more time to change her mind, but I already knew it would be futile. Patricia Martinez didn't change her mind once it was made up. It was a trait I'd inherited from her, though I like to think I applied it more judiciously. The next few days blurred together in a haze of wedding preparations and emotional processing. I threw myself into the details, confirming RSVPs, finalizing menu choices, picking up my dress from the alterations shop. Staying busy helped keep the hurt at bay, though quiet moments still brought waves of sadness and anger. Friends tried to be supportive, offering words of comfort and sharing their own stories of family drama. Marcus's buddies were particularly vocal in their disapproval of my mother's decision, with several offering to have their own mothers stand in during the ceremony. The gesture was sweet, but it wasn't the same. There's no substitute for your own mother on your wedding day. A week before the ceremony, I was at the base commissary, picking up last-minute items, when I ran into Sergeant Major Wilson, one of Marcus's mentors and someone who'd become a friend to both of us. He was an imposing man, built like a linebacker, with graying hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. "Sophia," he called out as I was loading groceries into my cart, "how are the wedding preparations going?" "Good," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just picking up some final things." He studied my face with the intensity that had probably served him well during his 25 years in the Corps. "You don't look like someone whose wedding is in a week. You look like someone carrying the weight of the world." Sergeant Major Wilson had this way of cutting through small talk straight to the heart of things. It was intimidating and comforting in equal measure. Before I knew it, I was telling him about my mother's refusal to attend, about how isolated I felt, about the sadness I was trying to hide from Marcus so he wouldn't worry. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, his expression growing more serious as I talked. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "You know," he said finally, "the Corps has a saying, 'We leave no one behind.' That applies to more than just combat situations." I wasn't sure what he meant, but something in his tone suggested this conversation wasn't over. He squeezed my shoulder gently, told me to hang in there, and walked away, leaving me standing in the commissary aisle, feeling slightly confused but oddly hopeful. The final days before the wedding passed in a blur of preparations and conflicted emotions. Part of me kept expecting my mother to call, to change her mind at the last minute. But as each day passed without word from her, I had to accept that she really wasn't going to be there. The night before the ceremony, I sat in my hotel room in dress rehearsal makeup, looking at myself in the mirror. Tomorrow, I would become Mrs. Sophia Thompson, starting a new chapter of my life with the man I loved. It should have been one of the happiest moments of my life, but the absence of my mother cast a shadow over everything. I picked up my phone and scrolled to her number, thumb hovering over the call button. One last try, one final plea for her to reconsider. But what would the point? She'd made her position clear, and begging would only diminish my own dignity. Instead, I set the phone aside and focused on what I did have. Marcus, who loved me completely and supported my dreams. Friends who'd become chosen family. A future full of possibilities, even if it included challenges and uncertainties my mother couldn't accept. I went to bed that night with a mixture of excitement and melancholy, wondering what tomorrow would bring, having no idea that the morning would hold surprises I couldn't have imagined in my wildest dreams. The morning of my wedding dawned crisp and clear, a perfect October day at Joint Base Lewis McChord. I'd chosen to have the ceremony at the base chapel, partly for convenience, but mostly because it felt right. This place had been such a significant part of Marcus's life, and by extension, mine. The chapel was beautiful in its simplicity, with stained glass windows that cast colorful patterns across wooden pews. I woke early, my stomach fluttering with a mixture of excitement and nerves. My matron of honor, Jessica, had stayed in the hotel room with me, and she was already up, brewing coffee in the tiny kitchenette while humming something that sounded vaguely like the wedding march. "Big day, bride," she said, grinning at me as I emerged from the bathroom. Jessica was married to one of Marcus's fellow Marines and had become one of my closest friends over the past year. She understood military life in ways my civilian friends couldn't, and her steady presence had been a source of comfort throughout the wedding planning process. "I can't believe it's actually here," I said, accepting the mug of coffee she offered. "6 months of planning, and now it's actually happening. How are you feeling about—" She paused delicately. "About your mom not being here?" I'd confided in Jessica about my mother's decision, and she'd been appropriately outraged on my behalf, while also being supportive of whatever I needed to process the situation. It was a delicate balance, but she'd managed it perfectly. Sad, I admitted, but also relieved, in a weird way. I don't have to worry about her disapproving looks or tense conversations today. I can just focus on marrying Marcus. Jessica nodded knowingly. Sometimes the people who love us have the strangest ways of showing it. We spent the morning getting ready at a leisurely pace. My dress was everything I'd dreamed of, elegant but not fussy, classic but not boring. It had been my one splurge, a designer gown I'd found at a sample sale that fit me perfectly with minimal alterations. When I put it on, Jessica actually teared up. "Marcus is going to lose his mind when he sees you," she said, adjusting my veil. "You look absolutely stunning." The photographer arrived to take getting ready photos, capturing moments I hope to look back on fondly years from now. There was something surreal about posing for pictures that would commemorate one of the most important days of my life, while the person who'd given me life was deliberately absent. Around noon, we made our way to the chapel for final preparations. The florist had done a beautiful job. White roses and greenery created elegant arrangements that complemented the chapel's natural beauty without overwhelming it. Guests were beginning to arrive, mostly Marines in their dress blues and their families. I was in the bridal suite, touching up my lipstick and trying to calm my nerves, when Jessica burst through the door with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Sophia, you need to come see something," she said, her voice strange. "Trust me, just come look." "What's wrong? Is Marcus okay?" My first thought was always that something had happened to him, an occupational hazard of loving someone in the military. "Marcus is fine, just come on." She led me to a window that faced the chapel's front entrance, and what I saw there made me gasp audibly. The parking lot and surrounding area were filled with Marines. Not just the handful of Marcus's close friends who'd been invited to the wedding, but dozens upon dozens of them, all in their dress blue uniforms, standing in formation. "What?" I started to say, but the words died in my throat as I watched more Marines arrive, taking their places in neat, orderly rows. They ranged in age from young privates, who looked barely old enough to shave, to grizzled veterans with chests full of ribbons and decorations. "There are more coming," Jessica said, her voice filled with awe. "They've been arriving for the past hour. Word apparently spread throughout the base about your situation." I stared at the scene below, trying to process what I was seeing. There had to be close to 100 Marines out there, maybe more. They stood at attention in perfect formation, creating an honor guard unlike anything I'd ever seen. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why are they here?" Before Jessica could answer, there was a knock on the door. She opened it to reveal Sergeant Major Wilson, looking impressive in his dress blues, his chest heavy with ribbons that told the story of a distinguished career. "Ms. Martinez," he said formally, then smiled. "Or should I say, the future Mrs. Thompson. You look beautiful." "Sergeant Major Wilson, what's happening out there?" His expression grew serious but warm. "When word got around the base about your mother's decision, well, let's just say the Marines weren't too happy about it. Nobody should have to get married without family there to support them. But I don't understand. These men don't even know me. Maybe not personally, he acknowledged, but you're marrying one of ours. That makes you family. And the Corps takes care of family. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, threatening to ruin my carefully applied makeup. But there are so many of them. Last count was 150, he said matter-of-factly. Could have been more, but some of the boys are deployed. They heard through the grapevine that you needed an honor guard for your wedding, so here they are. The full impact of what was happening began to sink in. These Marines, most of whom were complete strangers to me, had taken time out of their day, put on their dress uniforms, and come to my wedding because they'd heard I was getting married without family support. It was an act of solidarity and kindness so profound that it took my breath away. They want to form an honor guard for you as you leave the chapel, Sergeant Major Wilson continued, if you're comfortable with that. They know it doesn't replace your mother being here, but they wanted you to know that you're not alone. I couldn't speak for a moment, overwhelmed by the gesture. These men, who'd sworn an oath to serve and protect their country, were extending that same protective instinct to include me, simply because I was going to become the wife of one of their brothers in arms. I would be honored, I finally managed to say. Sergeant Major Wilson smiled. Good. Now we should probably get you married before this formation gets any bigger. As I walked down the aisle on the arm of Marcus's father, who'd graciously stepped in to give me away when my own father's absence became apparent, I could see Marcus waiting at the altar. He was resplendent in his dress blues, standing tall and proud, but his eyes were soft as he watched me approach. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. We'd written our own vows, and when it came time for me to speak, I looked into Marcus's eyes and saw everything I needed for the rest of my life reflected back at me. I promise to stand beside you through deployments and homecomings, I said, my voice steady despite the tears in my eyes. I promise to love you through the uncertainties and challenges that come with military life and to build a home with you wherever the Corps sends us. I promise to be your anchor when the seas get rough and your harbor when you need rest. Marcus's vows were equally heartfelt, speaking of protection and partnership, of building a life together that honored both love and service. When the chaplain pronounced us husband and wife, the small chapel erupted in applause and cheers. But the real surprise came when we walked back down the aisle as Mr. and Mrs. Thompson and stepped outside the chapel doors. 150 Marines stood at attention in perfect formation, creating an honor guard that stretched from the chapel steps down the walkway to the reception area. As we appeared, they simultaneously drew their swords, creating a gleaming archway of steel for us to walk beneath. The sight was breathtaking. These men, representing years of combined service and sacrifice, had come together to honor our union in a way that was both deeply personal and profoundly moving. Their faces were serious, professional, but I could see smiles in their eyes as we passed beneath their swords. We walked slowly, Marcus's hand firm in mine, through this corridor of honor. At the end of the formation, the Marines sheathed their swords in unison with a sound like thunder, then broke into applause and congratulations. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Thompson," Sergeant Major Wilson said as we reached the end of the honor guard. "That's what we do for our own." The reception that followed was unlike anything I could have imagined. What had started as a small gathering became a celebration that seemed to encompass the entire base. Marines who'd served as our honor guards stayed for the reception, sharing stories and jokes, treating me like a daughter or sister they'd known for years. I danced with Marcus, with his father, with Sergeant Major Wilson, and with countless Marines who insisted on congratulating the bride properly. Each dance, each conversation, each moment of celebration helped heal the wound left by my mother's absence. During a quiet moment, as I watched Marcus talking and laughing with his brothers in arms, I realized something profound had happened. I'd started the day feeling abandoned by my blood family, but I was ending it embraced by a chosen family that was stronger and more loyal than anything I'd ever experienced. The Marines who'd formed my honor guard didn't know my favorite color or remember my childhood birthdays. They didn't share my DNA or my family history. But they'd shown up for me in a way that mattered more than biology or obligation. They'd shown up because it was the right thing to do, because I was becoming part of their brotherhood, because no one should have to face life's big moments alone. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Sergeant Major Wilson approached me one final time. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, using my married name with obvious satisfaction, "I hope today showed you something important about the family you're joining." "It did," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I've never experienced anything like this." "The Corps is more than just a job or even a calling," he explained. "It's a way of life that extends to families, to the people we love. Your husband will serve his country, but we'll all serve each other. That includes you now." I hugged him impulsively, this tough Marine who'd orchestrated one of the most beautiful gestures I'd ever witnessed. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for making sure I wasn't alone today." "You're never alone now," he said simply. "Semper Fi, Mrs. Thompson." As Marcus and I drove away from the reception, heading to our honeymoon destination, I reflected on the day's events. I'd started the morning as Sofia Martinez, a woman whose mother couldn't accept her choices. I was ending it as Sofia Thompson, embraced by a family I'd never expected but would treasure forever. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced at it, expecting congratulations from a friend. Instead, I saw my mother's name on the screen. "I heard about your wedding on the local news. The honor guard was impressive. I hope you were happy." It wasn't an apology, but it also wasn't criticism. For my mother, it was probably as close to approval as I was likely to get. I showed the message to Marcus, who squeezed my hand. "How do you feel about that?" he asked. I considered the question, thinking about the day's events, about the choice between bitterness and grace, about the family I'd lost and the family I'd gained. "I feel sorry for her," I said finally. "She missed out on one of the most beautiful days of my life because she was too scared to trust that I knew what was best for me. But I also feel incredibly grateful for what happened instead." Marcus nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. It was one of the many things I loved about him, this ability to hold space for complex emotions without trying to fix or simplify them. As we drove through the Washington countryside, I thought about the 150 Marines who'd shown up for a woman they barely knew, simply because it was the right thing to do. I thought about the brotherhood I was now part of, the way military families take care of each other across all boundaries of blood and geography. My mother had refused my wedding invitation because she couldn't accept the uncertainties of military life. But what she'd missed was the incredible certainty of military loyalty, the way these men and women showed up for each other through deployments and relocations, through celebrations and tragedies, through all the challenges that life could throw at them. I'd married into more than just a relationship with Marcus. I'd married into a tradition of service and sacrifice, of loyalty and brotherhood, of people who understood that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. The honor guard that had formed for my wedding wasn't just a beautiful gesture. It was a promise, a commitment, a welcome into a way of life that valued service above self, that put community above convenience, that showed up when showing up mattered most. As we pulled into the hotel where we'd spend our wedding night, Marcus turned to me with a smile that held all the love and promise of our future together. "So, Mrs. Thompson," he said, "how does it feel to be married to a Marine?" I thought about the question, about the day's events, about the choice I'd made to love a man whose service would sometimes take him away from me, whose commitment to country would always be part of our marriage. "It feels like coming home," I said, and meant every word. The weeks following our honeymoon passed in a haze of domestic bliss and adjustment. Marcus and I settled into married life with surprising ease, finding our rhythm between his training schedules and my work as a freelance graphic designer. Our small apartment near the base became our sanctuary, filled with wedding photos that captured not just our joy, but the extraordinary display of support we'd received from the Marine Corps family. Every morning I would wake up and see the framed photograph on our nightstand, Marcus and I walking beneath the Arch of Swords, surrounded by 150 Marines in dress blues. It still felt surreal, like something from a movie rather than my actual life. The local news station had indeed covered the story, as my mother's text had mentioned, calling it an unprecedented display of military solidarity and a testament to the bonds that unite our service members and their families. But beyond the media attention, what struck me most was how the gesture had rippled outward, creating connections I never could have anticipated. Marines who'd served as our honor guard would stop by the commissary to check on how we were settling in. Their wives reached out to include me in spouse groups and social gatherings. What had started as a single act of kindness had blossomed into a genuine sense of community and belonging. I was learning that military families operated differently than civilian ones. There was an understanding that blood relatives might be scattered across the country or even the world, that traditional support systems didn't always apply when your job requires constant relocation. So military communities created their own networks, their own ways of ensuring no one faced life's challenges alone. 3 weeks after the wedding, I was grocery shopping at the base commissary when a woman approached me near the produce section. She was probably in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly, "are you Sophia Thompson, the bride from the honor guard wedding?" I nodded, still not entirely comfortable with the attention the story had brought. "Yes, that's me." Her face lit up with a smile. "I'm Linda Chen. My husband, Colonel Chen, was one of the Marines in your honor guard. I just wanted to tell you how much your story has meant to our community." "I'm not sure I understand." Linda glanced around, then moved closer, lowering her voice slightly. "Can we talk for a few minutes? Maybe grab a coffee in the food court?" Curious, I agreed, and soon we were sitting across from each other with steaming cups of coffee, the commissary bustling with activity around us. "Your story," Linda began, "it's resonated with more people than you might realize. Do you know how many military spouses have similar experiences with their families?" I shook my head, though I was beginning to suspect the number might be higher than I'd imagined. "Too many," she said firmly. "Parents who don't understand the lifestyle, siblings who think we're crazy for following our spouses from base to base, family members who see military service as somehow lesser than civilian careers. Your wedding honor guard has become a symbol of something important, that chosen family can be just as powerful as blood family." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. "I'm part of a support group for military spouses dealing with family estrangement. We meet twice a month, and we've had a lot of new members since your story aired on the news. Women who saw what happened at your wedding and realized they weren't alone in their experiences." Linda opened the folder and showed me a stack of handwritten letters. "These are from military families all over the country who heard about your honor guard. Some are sharing their own stories of family rejection, others are offering support, and many are expressing gratitude that someone finally put a spotlight on this issue." I picked up one of the letters and began to read. "Dear Mrs. Thompson, I saw the news story about your wedding and cried for 20 minutes. When I married my Marine husband 8 years ago, my parents didn't come to the ceremony either. They said I was throwing my life away, that I'd end up divorced and alone like so many other military wives. We've been through 3 deployments, 4 moves, and countless challenges, but our marriage has only grown stronger. Seeing those Marines surround you with support reminded me that we chose the right family. Thank you for showing the world what real loyalty looks like." The letter was signed by Rebecca Walsh from Camp Pendleton, California, and it was just one of dozens with similar themes. "This is incredible," I said, looking through more of the letters. "I had no idea our wedding would touch so many people." "That's the thing about military life," Linda explained. "We all share similar experiences, even when we're stationed thousands of miles apart. Your honor guard wasn't just about your wedding. It was a statement about how we take care of our own, regardless of biological family support." She leaned forward, her expression growing more serious. "Sophia, I want to ask you something, and please don't feel pressured to say yes. Some of us have been talking about organizing a support network for military spouses dealing with family estrangement. We're calling it Chosen Family Initiative, and we'd love to have you involved." "What would that involve?" "Nothing too overwhelming," Linda assured me. "Maybe speaking at spouse meetings occasionally, helping with outreach, sharing your story with families who are going through similar situations. You've become a bit of a symbol of resilience in our community, whether you intended to or not." I thought about it, remembering the loneliness I'd felt leading up to my wedding, the certainty that I was facing one of life's biggest moments without family support. If my experience could help other women feel less alone, maybe there was purpose in the pain I'd endured. "I'd be honored to help," I said finally. Linda's smile was radiant. "Wonderful. Our next meeting is Thursday evening at the Family Readiness Group building. Would you be able to come and maybe share your story?" I agreed, and as we parted ways, I felt a strange sense of destiny settling over me. What had started as personal heartbreak was somehow transforming into an opportunity to help others, to turn my experience of family rejection into a force for building community and support. That evening, I told Marcus about my conversation with Linda and my decision to get involved with the Chosen Family Initiative. He listened thoughtfully, then pulled me into his arms. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "You're taking something painful and turning it into something powerful." I just keep thinking about all those letters Linda showed me, all those women who felt alone because their families couldn't accept their choices. If sharing our story helps even one person feel less isolated, it's worth it. Marcus nodded. The core teaches us that our strength comes from our bonds with each other. Sounds like you're helping extend that philosophy to military families. Thursday evening came quickly, and I found myself walking into the Family Readiness Group building with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. The room was set up with chairs in a circle, and about 15 women were already seated, ranging in age from early 20s to late 50s. They represented different branches of the military through their spouses: Marines, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Coast Guard. Linda stood to introduce me, and the room fell quiet. "Ladies, I'd like you to meet Sophia Thompson. 3 weeks ago, she became famous throughout our community when 150 Marines formed an honor guard for her wedding after her mother refused to attend." There was polite applause, but I could see something deeper in their eyes: recognition, understanding, a shared knowledge of what it felt like to be rejected by people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. "Thank you all for having me," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Linda asked me to share my story, but I suspect many of you have similar experiences. The details might be different, but the core feelings are probably the same." I told them about my mother's phone call, about the weeks of hoping she'd change her mind, about the loneliness I'd felt planning a wedding without family support. I described the morning of the ceremony, when I'd woken up knowing my mother had chosen her fears over my happiness. "But then something extraordinary happened," I continued, and I could see women leaning forward in their chairs. The Marine Corps family stepped in. They created an honor guard that was more beautiful and meaningful than anything I could have imagined. They showed me that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choice, commitment, and showing up when it matters most. When I finished speaking, the room was quiet for a moment. Then a young woman near the back raised her hand. "I'm Jessica Rodriguez," she said. "My husband is deployed right now with the Army. When we got married 2 years ago, my entire family boycotted the ceremony because they said I was being stupid, following a man into a life of uncertainty and loneliness." Her voice wavered slightly. Sometimes I wonder if they were right. "Have you been lonely?" I asked gently. She considered the question. "Sometimes, especially during deployments." But I've also experienced love and support I never knew existed. Military wives have become sisters to me. When I had surgery last year, 3 different families brought me meals every day for 2 weeks. When my husband was in Afghanistan and I was terrified every time the news came on, other military wives sat with me, talked me through my fears, reminded me that I wasn't alone. She looked around the room. "My biological family sees military life as a limitation, but I found it's actually expanded my world. I've lived in places I never would have seen otherwise, met people from backgrounds completely different from my own, developed strength I didn't know I possessed." Other women began sharing their stories. Maria Santos talked about her parents' refusal to visit because they disapproved of the frequent moves required by Navy life. Catherine Williams described her sister's constant criticism of her decision to prioritize her husband's Air Force career over her own professional advancement. Susan Park shared how her wealthy family had cut her off financially when she married a Marine sergeant, claiming she was marrying beneath her station. Each story was different in its specifics, but the themes were remarkably consistent. Biological families who couldn't accept the uncertainties of military life, who saw service as somehow less valuable than civilian careers, who prioritized their own comfort and expectations over their children's happiness. But equally consistent were the stories of military communities stepping in to fill the gaps. Neighbors who became like grandparents to children whose biological grandparents lived far away or remained disapproving. Fellow spouses who provided support during deployments, illnesses, and relocations. Military families who created traditions and celebrations that honored both service and family bonds. As the evening progressed, I realized I was witnessing something profound. These women weren't just sharing their pain, they were celebrating their resilience. They'd all faced rejection from people they'd expected to support them, but they'd found ways to build meaningful lives despite that rejection. Linda closed the meeting by announcing plans for the Chosen Family Initiative's official launch. "We want to create a support network that extends beyond our individual bases," she explained. "A way for military families dealing with estrangement to connect with each other, share resources, and know they're not alone." She looked at me. "Sophia, would you be willing to serve as one of our founding board members? Your story has already inspired so many people, and your perspective would be valuable as we develop our programs." I didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." As women began filing out of the meeting, several stopped to thank me for sharing my story. One young wife, probably barely 21, approached with tears in her eyes. "My mom hasn't spoken to me since I got married 6 months ago," she whispered. "She said I was throwing my life away, that military wives end up abandoned and alone. Hearing your story, seeing how the Marines supported you, it gives me hope that I made the right choice." I hugged her impulsively. "You did make the right choice, not because military life is easy, but because you chose love over fear. That's always the right choice." Driving home that night, I reflected on the evening's conversations. What struck me most was how these women had transformed their experiences of rejection into sources of strength. They'd been told their choices were wrong, their love misguided, their futures uncertain. But they'd proven their critics wrong by building rich, meaningful lives within the military community. Over the following weeks, the Chosen Family Initiative began to take shape. Linda and I worked with other military spouses to develop resources for families dealing with estrangement. Support groups, counseling referrals, online forums for connecting military families across different bases and branches of service. The response was overwhelming. Military families from across the country reached out, sharing their stories and expressing gratitude that someone was finally addressing this often overlooked aspect of military life. We received emails from spouses stationed in Germany, Japan, and Hawaii, all describing similar experiences of family rejection and the military community's response. One email particularly moved me. It was from a Marine wife stationed at Okinawa, whose parents had disowned her when she married against their wishes. She described feeling completely isolated until she saw the news story about my wedding honor guard. "Your story reminded me that I'm not alone," she wrote. "The Marines here have become my brothers, their wives my sisters. When my daughter was born last month and my parents refused to acknowledge their first grandchild, 15 Marine families showed up at the hospital to celebrate with us. Your honor guard inspired us to create our own chosen family traditions, and we're stronger for it." Stories like this reinforced my growing understanding that what had happened at my wedding was part of something much larger. The honor guard hadn't been just about one bride whose mother couldn't accept her choices. It had been about a military community's commitment to ensuring no one faced life's important moments alone. As autumn progressed, I found myself increasingly involved in Chosen Family Initiative activities. I spoke at spouse meetings on different bases, sharing my story and facilitating discussions about family estrangement. I helped develop online resources for military families dealing with rejection from biological relatives. Most importantly, I listened to countless stories of women who'd found strength and community within military culture after being rejected by their birth families. Each conversation reinforced the same theme. Military families understood loyalty, commitment, and sacrifice in ways that civilian families sometimes couldn't. They showed up for each other during deployments, relocations, and crises because they understood that their strength came from their bonds with each other. But the most significant development came in early November, when I received a phone call that would change everything. I was working in my home office when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Colonel Patricia Hayes from Marine Corps Headquarters in Washington, D.C. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" My heart rate immediately increased. Phone calls from Marine Corps Headquarters were rarely routine social conversations. "Of course, Colonel Hayes. How can I help you?" "Ma'am, I've been following the work you've been doing with military families through the Chosen Family Initiative. I've also read the reports about your wedding honor guard and its impact on military communities nationwide." She paused, and I waited nervously for whatever was coming next. The Marine Corps is developing a new program to support military families dealing with various challenges, including estrangement from biological families. We're looking for civilian advocates who understand military culture and can help bridge the gap between military and civilian communities. Your name has been mentioned repeatedly as someone who might be interested in this kind of work. I was stunned. What exactly would this involve? We're still developing the specifics, but essentially it would be a consulting position. You'd work with military family support services to develop programs, resources, and advocacy efforts specifically focused on helping military families navigate difficult relationships with civilian relatives. You'd also serve as a public speaker, sharing your story and helping agitate civilian communities about military family experiences. The opportunity was incredible, but also overwhelming. Colonel Hayes, I'm honored that you'd consider me for something like this, but I'm not sure I'm qualified. I don't have formal training in family counseling or social work. Mrs. Thompson, you have something more valuable than formal training, authentic experience, and a platform that people respect. Your story has already helped hundreds of military families feel less alone. This position would allow you to expand that impact significantly. She gave me time to process the offer, explaining that the position would involve travel to different military installations, speaking engagements at civilian organizations, and collaboration with military family support services. It was exactly the kind of work I'd found myself drawn to through the Chosen Family Initiative, but on a much larger scale. Can I have some time to discuss this with my husband? I asked. Of course, take all the time you need. This is a big decision, and military families understand the importance of making choices together. That evening, Marcus and I sat on our small balcony overlooking the base, discussing the opportunity Colonel Hayes had presented. The autumn air was crisp, and I could see Marines in the distance conducting evening training exercises, their voices carrying on the wind. "What does your gut tell you?" Marcus asked after I'd explained the position's requirements and responsibilities. "That it feels right," I admitted. Like maybe everything that happened with my mother, the honor guard, all of it was leading to this opportunity. But it would mean a lot of travel, time away from you, building a career around something that started as personal pain. Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching the training exercises below. "You know what I learned in the Corps? Sometimes the most important missions are the ones you never expected to receive. You didn't set out to become an advocate for military families, but you've proven you're good at it. You've helped people feel less alone, shown them that their experiences matter." He turned to face me. "As for the travel, I deploy regularly anyway. At least when you're traveling, you'll be helping people instead of just waiting for me to come home." His support meant everything to me. "Are you sure? This would change our life pretty significantly." "Sophia, 3 months ago, 150 Marines showed up to your wedding because they believed in taking care of family. Now the Marine Corps is asking you to help them take better care of military families nationwide. I think you'd be crazy not to say yes." I called Colonel Hayes the next morning and accepted the position. Within 2 weeks, I was on my way to my first assignment, speaking at a civilian community organization in North Carolina about military family challenges and the importance of community support for service members and their families. The audience was made up of local business leaders, church representatives, and community volunteers, many of whom had little direct experience with military culture. Standing at the podium, looking out at their expectant faces, I felt the same mixture of nervousness and purpose I'd experienced at my first Chosen Family Initiative meeting. But I also felt something new, the weight of responsibility for representing not just my own experience, but the experiences of countless military families who'd faced similar challenges. 3 months ago, I began, I got married in front of 150 Marines who barely knew me. They showed up because my mother refused to attend my wedding, and they wanted to make sure I didn't face one of life's most important moments alone. I could see the audience's attention sharpen, their curiosity piqued by the unusual opening. "But this isn't really a story about my wedding," I continued. "It's a story about what happens when biological families can't accept the choices their children make, and how military communities step in to fill those gaps. It's about loyalty, service, and what it really means to be family." As I told my story and shared statistics about military family estrangement, I could see understanding dawning in their faces. Many had never considered how military families navigate relationships with civilian relatives who don't understand their lifestyle choices. They hadn't thought about how frequent moves, deployments, and the culture of service could create rifts with families who prioritize stability and predictability. During the question and answer session, a middle-aged woman raised her hand. "My son is stationed at Camp Lejeune," she said. "I've been critical of his choice to make the military his career because I worry about the risks and the instability. After hearing your story, I'm wondering if my concerns are actually pushing him away." It was exactly the kind of conversation I'd hoped to facilitate. Military service does involve risks and challenges, I acknowledged, but it also provides purpose, community, and opportunities for growth that many civilian careers can't match. The question isn't whether military life is risky, it's whether you trust your son to make good decisions about his own future. She nodded thoughtfully. "I never thought about it that way." After the presentation, several audience members approached me with questions about how they could better support military families in their community. A local church leader asked about partnering with base family services to provide support during deployments. A business owner inquired about military spouse employment opportunities. A grandmother admitted that she'd been critical of her daughter-in-law's military career, but wanted to learn how to be more supportive. Flying home that evening, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This work felt like more than just a job. It felt like a calling. I was helping bridge divides between military and civilian communities, fostering understanding where there had been judgment, creating connections where there had been isolation. Over the following months, my work expanded rapidly. I spoke at universities, community organizations, and military installations across the country. I helped develop resources for military families dealing with estrangement, and I worked with civilian communities to create better support systems for service members and their families. But perhaps most importantly, I continued to hear from military families whose stories echoed my own. Each conversation reinforced my understanding that the honor guard at my wedding had been about something much larger than one bride's family drama. It had been about a military community's commitment to ensuring that service and sacrifice were honored, that loyalty was reciprocated, and that no one who chose to serve their country would face life's important moments alone. The work was challenging, emotionally demanding, and often heartbreaking, but it was also deeply fulfilling in ways I'd never expected. I was taking the pain of my mother's rejection and transforming it into a force for healing and connection. I was helping military families feel less alone while also educating civilian communities about the realities of military life. As winter approached, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. A year ago, I'd been a woman struggling with family rejection, feeling isolated and misunderstood. Now, I was a military family advocate, traveling the country to share my story and help others navigate similar challenges. The transformation hadn't erased the pain of my absence from my wedding, but it had given that pain meaning and purpose. Sometimes, the most difficult experiences in our lives become the foundation from our most important work, and I was beginning to understand that truth in ways I'd never imagined possible. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus, who was in the field for training exercises. "Saw the news article about your speech in Colorado. Proud of you for turning our story into something that helps so many people. Can't wait to hear all about it when I get home." I smiled, looking out the airplane window at the lights of cities passing below. Somewhere down there were military families dealing with estrangement, struggling with the gap between their chosen lives and their biological family's expectations. Tomorrow, I would continue working to help bridge those gaps, one story and one conversation at a time. The honor guard that had formed for my wedding had been the beginning, not the end of something beautiful. They'd shown me what chosen family looked like, and now I was helping others discover the same truth, that love, loyalty, and support aren't determined by blood, by choice, commitment, and the willingness to show up when it matters most. The phone call came on a rainy Tuesday morning in February, exactly 8 months after my wedding. I was reviewing speaking notes for an upcoming presentation when I saw my mother's name flash across the screen. We hadn't spoken since her brief text message after the honor guard story aired on the news. My finger hovered over the decline button. Part of me wasn't ready for whatever this conversation might bring, but something made me answer. "Hello, Mom." Sophia. Her voice sounded different somehow, softer than I remembered. I was wondering if we could meet somewhere, just to talk. I set down my pen, surprised by the request. "What did you want to talk about?" "About us, about everything that's happened. I've been watching the news stories about your work with military families, reading the articles. I think there are things I need to say." We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop in downtown Seattle, neutral territory where neither of us would feel trapped. I spent the drive there trying to prepare myself for whatever she might say, but nothing could have prepared me for what actually happened. She was already seated when I arrived, looking smaller somehow than I remembered. Her gray hair was styled differently, less severe, and she wore a soft blue sweater instead of her usual stark business attire. When she saw me, she stood awkwardly, as if unsure whether to hug me or shake my hand. We settled for a brief, uncomfortable embrace. "Thank you for coming," she said, as we sat down across from each other. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted, "but I figured we both deserve to say whatever needs to be said." She nodded, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. "I've been thinking a lot about your wedding day, about my decision not to attend, about the things I said to you." I waited, not sure where this was going. "I saw the footage of your honor guard on the news," she continued. "All those Marines in their dress uniforms, making sure you didn't walk alone. It was beautiful, Sophia, and it made me realize something terrible about myself." Her voice caught slightly. "I should have been there. Not because I agreed with your choices, but because you're my daughter. Because sometimes supporting someone you love means putting your fears aside and showing up." I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't what I'd expected from her. "I was scared," she said simply. "Terrified that you'd end up hurt or alone or facing the kind of struggles I faced when your father left. I thought if I withheld my approval, maybe you'd reconsider, choose someone safer, more predictable. But that wasn't your decision to make," I said quietly. "No, it wasn't. And watching those Marines surround you with support on the day I should have been there, it showed me what real love looks like. It's not controlling or conditional. It's showing up, even when you're afraid." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. It was the article about my speech at the Military Family Conference in Virginia, where I talked about chosen family and the importance of supporting service members' relationships. "I've been following your work," she said, "reading every article, watching every interview. You've built something meaningful from the pain I caused you. You've helped hundreds of families, maybe thousands. You turned my rejection into a force for healing." I stared at the clipping, seeing myself in the photo standing at a podium, addressing a room full of military families. "It wasn't about you, Mom. It was about them, about helping people feel less alone." "I know, and that makes it even more remarkable." She looked directly at me for the first time since I'd arrived. "You could have become bitter, could have let my refusal to support you turn you inward. Instead, you used it to reach outward, to help others facing similar rejection." The conversation continued for over an hour. She told me about the therapy she'd been attending, working through her anxiety and control issues. She talked about conversations with her own therapist about military families and the unique challenges they faced. Most surprisingly, she'd been volunteering with a local organization that provided support services to veterans and their families. "I wanted to understand your world," she explained, "the community you'd chosen to be part of. I needed to see if I'd been wrong about military life, about the people who choose to serve." "And what did you discover?" "That I had been wrong, about almost everything. The military families I've met are some of the strongest, most committed people I've ever encountered. They face challenges I never imagined with grace and resilience. They support each other in ways that put most civilian communities to shame." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I also discovered that my fears about military marriage were based on ignorance and prejudice. Yes, there are unique challenges, but there are also unique strengths. The bonds between military families, the way they take care of each other, the sense of purpose and service that guides their lives, it's actually beautiful." As she spoke, I found myself seeing glimpses of the mother I'd hoped she could become. Not perfect, not without flaws, but willing to grow, to admit when she'd been wrong, to do the work necessary for repair. "There's something else," she said, reaching into her purse again. This time she pulled out a check, folded in half. "I know it doesn't make up for missing your wedding, but I wanted to contribute to your organization, the Chosen Family Initiative. I've been reading about the work you're doing, and I'd like to support it." I unfolded the check and stared at the amount. It was substantial, more than enough to fund several months of programming. "Mom, this is too much. You don't need to do this." "Yes, I do. I can't undo my absence from your wedding, but I can support the work that grew from it. Consider it an investment in military families and maybe a small step toward earning your forgiveness." The word hung between us, heavy with possibility and risk. Forgiveness, not something I'd expected to consider during this conversation. "I can't just flip a switch and forgive everything that happened," I said carefully. "The hurt from your absence, the years of disapproval, the way you made me feel like my choices were constantly wrong, that's not going away overnight." She nodded. "I understand. I don't expect immediate forgiveness, but I hope we can find a way to rebuild, slowly. I want to be part of your life, Sophia. I want to support your marriage, your work, the family you're building with Marcus. What would that look like? I don't know exactly. Maybe starting with coffee meetings like this one. Getting to know Marcus better, really getting to know him, instead of just judging him. Learning about military life instead of fearing it. Supporting your work instead of questioning your choices." She leaned forward slightly. "And maybe, if you'll let me, being the mother I should have been all along." The conversation ended with tentative plans to meet again in a few weeks. No dramatic reconciliation, no immediate healing of old wounds, but a beginning. A fragile possibility that we might find our way back to each other, different than before, but perhaps stronger. Driving home, I called Marcus to tell him about the meeting. He listened without interrupting, letting me process the complexity of emotions I was feeling. "How do you feel about it?" he asked when I finished. "Confused? Hopeful? Scared? Angry? Grateful? Pretty much every emotion possible, all at once." "That sounds about right for a conversation like that. Are you going to see her again?" "I think so. Not because I'm ready to pretend nothing happened, but because she seems genuinely committed to doing the work to repair our relationship. And maybe because the work I'm doing with military families has taught me something about the difference between holding people accountable and holding on to resentment." Over the following months, my mother and I began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship. She attended therapy regularly, worked with a counselor who specialized in family reconciliation, and continued her volunteer work with veteran support organizations. More importantly, she made genuine efforts to understand and support my life choices. She started by getting to know Marcus better, inviting us both to dinner and actually listening when he talked about his service, his goals, his love for me. She asked thoughtful questions about deployments, military culture, and the challenges of military family life. She even attended one of my speaking engagements, sitting in the back of the auditorium as I addressed a room full of civilian community leaders about supporting military families. But the real transformation came 6 months later, when Marcus received orders for his first deployment since we'd been married. I was terrified, not just about being separated from him, but about facing the unknown challenges of deployment life. Military spouses had shared their experiences with me, but living it myself would be different. The night before Marcus left, my mother showed up at our apartment with a care package and an unexpected offer. "I know deployment is difficult for spouses," she said. "I've been reading about it, talking to other military families. I want you to know that you're not alone. If you need anything, anything at all, I'm here." It wasn't just words. Over the next several months, as Marcus served in Afghanistan, my mother proved her commitment in dozens of small but meaningful ways. She sent care packages not just to me, but to Marcus overseas. She attended military family support meetings with me, learning about deployment challenges from other spouses. When I had speaking engagements that required travel, she helped coordinate logistics and even accompanied me to some events as unofficial support staff. Most importantly, when the inevitable challenges of deployment arose, the sleepless nights worrying about Marcus's safety, the loneliness that seemed to echo through our empty apartment, the stress of managing everything alone, she was consistently available. Not intrusive, not overwhelming, just present in the way I'd always needed her to be. The deployment also deepened my understanding of military family experiences in ways that enhanced my advocacy work. Living through the uncertainty, the communication challenges, the constant undercurrent of worry gave me a more authentic perspective to share with both military and civilian communities. I spoke at conferences about deployment challenges for families, helped develop resources for first-time deployment spouses, and continued building bridges between military and civilian communities. My mother's transformation became part of my story, an example of how civilian families could learn to understand and support their military relatives. When Marcus returned from deployment, we hosted a small welcome home celebration. Among the Marines and military families who attended was my mother, who had become not just a supporter of my work, but an advocate for military families in her own right. As I watched her talking with other military spouses about her volunteer work with veteran services, I realized something profound had happened. She hadn't just learned to accept my choices, she'd found her own way to serve military families. Her fear had been transformed into advocacy, her rejection had become support. Later that evening, as the party wound down and guests began to leave, my mother approached Marcus and me with something she wanted to say. "I owe you both an apology," she began. "Not just for missing your wedding, but for all the ways I failed to support your relationship and your choices. I spent so much time being afraid of what might go wrong that I missed what was going right." She looked at Marcus. "You've proven to be exactly the kind of husband I should have hoped my daughter would find. Committed, loyal, supportive of her dreams, willing to serve something larger than yourself. I was wrong to judge your career choice, wrong to see military service as a limitation instead of a calling." Then she turned to me. "And Sofia, watching you build meaning from pain, watching you help hundreds of families feel less alone, watching you turn my rejection into a force for healing, it's shown me what real strength looks like. You didn't just survive my absence from your wedding, you transformed it into something beautiful." The three of us stood together in our small apartment, surrounded by the remnants of celebration, and I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete family support. Not perfect, not without scars from past hurts, but genuine and committed. 6 months later, I received another unexpected phone call, this time from the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation. They wanted to honor the honor guard from my wedding with a special recognition ceremony, acknowledging their role in creating one of the most significant displays of military family support in recent history. The ceremony would take place at the Marine Corps War Memorial in Washington, D.C., and all 150 Marines who had participated in my wedding honor guard would be invited to attend. More importantly, they wanted me to deliver the keynote address about military families, chosen family, and the bonds that unite service members and their communities. Standing at the podium near the iconic statue of Marines raising the flag at Iwo Jima, looking out at the faces of the men who had changed my life with their simple act of kindness, I thought about the journey that had brought us all to this moment. 18 months ago, my mother refused to attend my wedding because she couldn't accept my choice to marry a Marine. Today, she's sitting in the audience, having become one of the strongest advocates for military families I know. Sometimes the greatest transformations come from the deepest challenges. I looked at the Marines in their dress blues, many of whom I now knew by name, whose families had become part of my extended military community. You formed an honor guard for a bride you barely knew because you understood something my biological family couldn't grasp at the time: that loyalty isn't determined by blood, but by choice. That family isn't just about who you're born to, but about who shows up when it matters most. The ceremony concluded with a presentation recognizing the Honor Guard Marines for their extraordinary display of military values in action. But more meaningful to me was what happened afterward, during the reception, when my mother approached Sergeant Major Wilson, the man who had organized the original Honor Guard. "I want to thank you," she told him, "not just for being there for Sofia when I wasn't, but for showing me what real support looks like. You didn't just give her a beautiful wedding moment, you gave her a community, a family, and ultimately, you helped bring our family back together." Sergeant Major Wilson, never one for emotional displays, simply nodded. "That's what we do, ma'am. We take care of our own." As the evening ended and we prepared to fly back to Seattle, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with my mother's refusal to attend my wedding. That rejection, which had felt like the end of family connection, had become the beginning of something far more meaningful. Authentic relationships built on mutual support rather than obligation, chosen family bonds that had proven stronger than biology, and a calling that had allowed me to help hundreds of other families navigate similar challenges. The honor guard that had formed for my wedding had been about more than supporting one bride. It had been a demonstration of values, a commitment to ensuring that no one who served their country would face life's important moments alone, and a reminder that sometimes the most powerful families are the ones we choose rather than the ones we inherit. My mother's transformation from rejection to advocacy had shown that people could change, that fear could become understanding, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most painful experiences. The work I was doing with military families had grown from personal pain into purposeful action, helping others find community and support when their biological families couldn't provide it. As our plane lifted off from Washington, D.C., carrying us back to our life at the base, I thought about the Honor Guard Marines and their families, about my mother's journey from fear to support, about the countless military families I'd met who had found strength in chosen community when biological family failed them. The greatest honor guard isn't just the one that shows up for special occasions. It's the one that remains present through all of life's challenges and celebrations, offering support without conditions, loyalty without limits, and love that transcends the boundaries of blood and birth. Sometimes we're born into that kind of family, and sometimes we have to create it ourselves. But either way, it's the foundation that allows us to serve something larger than ourselves while never facing that service alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.